Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Alfas. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor of German in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages, and I'm also the director of the Ray Wolpow Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity. Welcome to Western. Welcome to the library. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin, San Juan Islands, and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. The responsibility to remember extends to the many places we all call home. Keenly aware of the responsibility the past confers on us, I do not intend for this land acknowledgement to be another empty ritual. Rather, it is a call for active and responsible engagement with our past and present. Here in Bellingham, learning from our Slaktamish and Nooksack neighbors, their places, stories, languages, and traditions helps us to disentangle contested legacies and to question and rewrite dominant narratives of the past. We do this in an attempt to respectfully build our communities as more inclusive and just, not only for today, but also for tomorrow, no matter the challenges. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for the Lami Nation and the Nooksack tribe for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon as we honor the life and legacy of Noemi Ban, who passed away in June at the age of 96, and as we officially launch the new minor in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, the first such program at a public university in the state of Washington. A special welcome to all local members and friends of the immediate Ban family: Steve, Janice, Julia, Miriam, Mark, Jim, and Ray. And of course, I also wish to acknowledge those who could not attend this afternoon, but who will see the video we are taping at a later time. George and family in New York State and Ohio, Nora in New York, Michael in North Carolina, Rachel and family in Montana, Faith, Diane, Patty, Harriet, Karen, Esther, Hank, and Corinne. Steve, if I'm forgetting anyone, please tell me later, and it's entirely my fault. Dr. Greg Baker, Superintendent of Bellingham Public Schools, and Dee Simon, the Baral Family Director of the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle, and board member of the Association of Holocaust Organizations, of which the Wolpow Institute is a member, are also joining us this afternoon. Dr. Waller's talk is made possible by the generous support from Bernhard Kohlmeier and Lisa Ann Mikolanczyk, the Friends of the Ray Wolpow Institute Fund, and the following on-campus units: the Western Libraries, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Woodring College of Education, the Institute for Global Engagement, and the Departments of Anthropology, Global Humanities and Religions, and Modern and Classical Languages. Please join me in thanking them for their generosity. A heartfelt thank you as well to the Wolpow Institute's administrative assistant, Sheila Purnell, for her organizational talents in putting the many moving pieces of the day together, and to the President's Office, the Provost's Office, Western Libraries, Special Collections and Heritage Resources, the Office of Communications and Marketing, University Police, Digital Media Production and Development, ATUS, Digital Video Services, Viking Union Event Services, Western Catering, and the Western Associated Students Bookstore. As you walked into the room, you saw the slideshow that Professor Emeritus Ray Wolpow put together a few years ago in honor of Noemi Ban. A gifted teacher, a compassionate advocate for Holocaust education, and a genuinely kind human being, Noemi worked closely with the Western community for over 30 years. At Western, she shared her story with thousands of students and encouraged faculty to integrate Holocaust education into the curriculum. The university honored Noemi's extraordinary commitment to teaching with an honorary degree in 2013. Her advocacy for and persistence on the importance of teaching the the Holocaust and its lessons brought about the creation of the Northwest Center for Holocaust, Genocide, and Ethnocide Education, 1998, the Ray Wolpow Institute, 2016, and finally also served as inspiration of the new minor. As we celebrate the minor's launch and host our first and only event this fall, it is therefore only natural to honor Noemi's legacy at our university. While we miss her dearly, we are also fortunate to having been a part of her life since the 1990s. Her message has lost nothing of its urgency and remains pertinent, perhaps now more than ever, to call out and act against anti-Semitism and any other form of bigotry, hate, and discrimination. Many of you reached out and are still sharing with us what Noemi meant to them. Just on Tuesday, Western graduate and former Wolpow Institute student volunteer Alex Drexel, class of 2018, posted the following from Guam to our Facebook site. Quote, "I wish that I could be there, but I will be there in spirit. She was such a warm and inspiring person. It is still hard to believe that she is gone. She made this world a brighter and better place. Despite the fact that she's no longer with us, I know that her memory, legacy, and impact will live on in all of those who heard her speak. I certainly will carry it with me forever." End of quote. If you would like to share your memories of Noemi, we have a remembrance book on this table here for you to sign during the reception. Western President Sabah Randhawa will now pay tribute to Noemi and her enduring legacy. It is my deep honor to welcome you to the podium at this point. Thank you for being here, Sabah.
Thank you for the introduction, Sandra, and for your leadership. Good evening to all of you and welcome. I'm honored to have this opportunity to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Noemi Ban. Although I only knew her for a couple of years, Noemi's attitude towards life and the depth of her wisdom were immediately striking and inspiring to me, as they were to so many people. Getting to know Noemi better over the last few years was a great privilege. But one of the hallmarks of meeting a truly wise person is that they can change your way of thinking with a single exposure. That is one of the many things that made Noemi such a great teacher and why she could have such a profound influence on the audiences to whom she spoke about Holocaust and genocide education. We pause to remember Noemi today because she is still with us in close memory, and because we wish her spirit and legacy to continue the work of the Northwest Center for Holocaust, Genocide, and Ethnocide Education, the Ray Wolpow Institute, and now the new minor. For a few minutes, I would like to extend that wish for Noemi's loving and powerful wisdom to also be our guide on Western's campus community, in our region, our nation, and the world as a whole. Noemi, who had experienced the worst side of humanity, refused to give in to hatred or despair, even though many people would think she would be justified in doing so. In Auschwitz, Noemi experienced deprivation, hunger, emotional anguish, and physical discomfort like few of us ever have or ever will. From these awful experiences, she learned never to take anything for granted. An alchemist for the spirit, she transmuted the poison of hatred into love and compassion. I want to share some of Noemi's words that she delivered to our graduates when she received her honorary doctorate at Western's 2013 spring commencement ceremony. She said, quote, "People ask me if I hate those who killed my family, and I say a big no. I learned in Auschwitz, Birkenau, that hate is wrong. Hate is killing. Hate is a prison. I learned that in a place where terror, horror, and killing were a daily experience, that life is precious. I know that if I would have hate in my heart right now, I would not be free. I would be a prisoner of my own hate, and I want to be free. She went on to say, people ask, what can I do? One person cannot change the whole world, but one person can make a difference in using their freedom to help in their own community. You are college graduates, you are smart and you are free. Use your freedom and your intelligence to make this a better world. I've been reflecting on those last lines about what one person can do, because I think a great deal of our challenges with respect to advancing equity, tolerance, and inclusion are in the end about culture change. Top-down institutional policies and initiatives are no doubt critical to advancing these goals, in expressing our shared values and in reminding us that we are in this journey together for the long haul. But systemic, long-lasting change involves shifting a culture embodied in the countless practices, exchanges, and relationships among the individual members of a community. While few individuals can change the whole world, we should not let that discourage us or prevent us from taking action and responsibility for what we can, where we can. In Noemi's words, using our freedom and intelligence to make this a better world. This is not insignificant work done on the margins while great people make history. It is the great engine of change. It is not easy. There are an infinite number of ways to make exceptions and qualifications, to see the struggles and sufferings of others as somehow different from, less worthy than our own. But this is our work, our shared responsibility, and Noemi is one of those rare sages who showed us how to do it. In our relentlessly political times, these efforts can often be mired in the swamps of ideology where they even get off the ground. There are those who cannot separate the value of Holocaust and genocide studies from the political gain or loss of one group or another. Again, we can learn from Noemi, who did not advocate for an ideology, but for the preservation of personal histories and critical inquiry into the facts in service to promoting our shared humanity. Noemi, who always had a gentle smile, also modeled how to grapple with the evil in the world without being overcome by it. She knew that futility and despair were just as much of a prison for the soul as hate. We remember and learn from the hells that humans have made for each other not to dwell in them, but to bring that knowledge back to the world of the living, to honor those memories by redoubling our efforts to promote and protect our shared humanity, our civil and human rights. Noemi knew that both parts of the journey, into the darkness of the past and back into the light of the present, were essential not only to preventing future catastrophe, but to maintaining our personal sense of hope. Thank you, Noemi.
I learned the lesson of Auschwitz. What was it? That hate destroys not the one whom we hate. Hate destroys the person who hates. I don't hate because I want to be free, and I am free. But what I'm doing instead of hating, what I'm doing now almost every day, speaking against prejudice, bigotry, and hate by telling you.
Thank you, Sabah, for your tribute. Thank you as well to Suzanne Blaze for creating this clip. Videos of Noemi are also accessible online through the Western Library's CEDAR site. Jenny Olin and Kim Marsicek and Western Libraries are currently developing the Noemi Bunn Memorial Collection in coordination with the Wolpow Institute. It is an open access online archive that will hold numerous free resources intended for public use to keep Noemi's story alive. As I mentioned before, we could not be launching the new minor if it weren't for Noemi's engagement with the Western community. In the past few weeks, quite a few have actually asked me how the Wolpow Institute, and by extension the minor, came about in the first place. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes revisiting this process, and more importantly, recognizing the numerous colleagues whose commitment to undergraduate education has brought us to this very moment. In the fall of 2016, Western established the Ray Wolpow Institute to honor, continue, and expand the work of Ray Wolpow, who had founded the Northwest Center for Holocaust, Genocide, and Ethnocide Education in 1998 to assist educators in the design and implementation of Holocaust, genocide, and ethnocide-related studies. When campus community members learned of his pending retirement, which was, of course, wonderful for him, but challenging for us, a group formed to discuss how the Northwest Center could continue and expand its work for the benefit of all students, and how other departments and colleges could aid in furthering the center's mission and visibility on and off campus. The creation of a university-wide institute came after a 2-year faculty-driven process that involved staff, faculty, and administrative colleagues from across the university. The committee tasked me with authoring both the pre-proposal and the final proposal. And the final proposal was moved forward to the Provost's office in March 2016 by Babafemi Akinrinade, Fairhaven, Jean Armstrong, Libraries, Amanda Urick, History, Margaret Fast, Libraries, Petra Fierro, Modern and Classical Languages, Kristen French, Center for Education, Equity, and Diversity, Stephen Garfinkel, History, Mark Greenberg, Libraries, Vicky Hamblin, Institute for Global Engagement, Kevin Leonard, History, Leanne Martin, CHSS, Ed Matthew, History, Sebastian Mendes, Art, Paqui Paredes, at that time Modern and Classical Languages, Cornelius Page, Modern and Classical Languages, Francisco Rios, Woodring College of Education, Kathleen Young, Anthropology, Sheila Webb, Journalism, Ray Wolpow, Secondary Education, and Angela Vandenhark, Western Foundation. Eminent Holocaust Studies scholar John K. Roth, the Edward Sexton Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and the founding director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights at Claremont McKenna College, as well as community members and external nonprofit organizations, for example, the German Honorary Consulate in Seattle, supported and recommended the creation of the Institute. I became its founding director in the fall of 2016, splitting my full-time faculty appointment since then between my home department, Modern and Classical Languages, and the Wolpow Institute, with full faculty rights, privileges, and responsibilities. Creating a university-wide minor in Holocaust and Genocide Studies was one of the Institute's central goals, and as faculty director, it is my responsibility to make sure, of course, that goals are met. You probably know that Washington State recommends the teaching of the Holocaust in schools, and that Washington State Senate Bill 5612 recently strengthened Holocaust education in Washington schools, including the teaching of genocide and crimes against humanity. The Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle, under the leadership of Dee Simon, played a pivotal role in securing passage of the Senate bill. Until now, Western has neither addressed nor served this state need. This is particularly disconcerting since we lead all public institutions and graduating students with the endorsement to teach social studies in Washington secondary schools. With these new minor then, Western is clearly starting to address state needs. For the past 1.5 years, I worked closely with the Faculty Advisory Committee to the Wolpow Institute on curriculum development, and along the way, coordinated with faculty colleagues, departments, and department chairs. ACC, the Academic Coordinating Commission, which oversees curriculum development at Western, approved the minor in the spring of 2019. I would like to express my gratitude to all members of the Wolpow Institute Advisory Committee, past and present, who have helped make this minor a reality. Babafemi Akinrinade, Fairhaven, Andrew Boudreau, Physics, Yvonne Durham, Economics, Yanara Friedland, Fairhaven, Keith Hyatt, Special Education, Elizabeth Joffrion, Heritage Resources, Special Collections, McNeil Jansen, Linguistics, Jan Milius, Environmental Studies, Sebastian Mendes, Art, Aaron Persigian, Special Education, and Sarah Zero, History. Additionally, I want to thank the faculty members teaching in the minor with me this year. Babafemi Akinrinade, Fairhaven, Amanda Urick, History, Chris Friday, History, Rachel Paul, Political Science, Susanne Rinner, German, and Sarah Zero, History. Early on, Western parents Bernhard Kohlmeier and Lisa Ann Mikolanczyk endowed the Kohlmeier-Mikolanczyk Fund for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And last but not least, Sheila Pennell, Administrative Assistant to the Wolpow Institute, Jamie Lawson, Catalog and Curriculum Specialist in the Registrar's Office, and Mark Geisler, CHSS, offered indispensable logistical support throughout the year. As you see and hear, it takes a village. Please join me in thanking all of these colleagues, past and present, for making Holocaust and genocide education available at Western. Working with dedicated student volunteers since the Institute's creation has been one of the highlights of my appointment, and I am so thrilled that we are officially welcoming you, dear students, to the minor. Currently, 7 of you are enrolled and you have declared. If you are interested in learning more about the minor or just meeting each other, I invite you to our pizza dinner info session on Tuesday, October 29th from 5 to 6 in Miller Hall 121. General advising hours during fall quarter are Wednesdays 1 to 4. It's never too early to prepare for winter quarter, so stop by our office here in the library, 5th floor, 571, 572 to learn more. Of course, info is also available on our website and on Facebook. We are delighted and honored that Professor James Waller, one of the country's foremost experts in the field, has accepted our invitation to give the minor's inaugural address, Confronting Evil, Why Holocaust and Genocide Studies Matter Today. A short Q&A will follow his presentation. The bookstore is also here if you would like to purchase Dr. Waller's books during the reception, and we have some of them lined up here. Now it is my honor to welcome Professor Babafemi Akinrinade for his introduction of Professor Waller. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. James Waller, who is a speaker this afternoon. Dr. Waller received his PhD in social psychology and is the inaugural Cohen Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College in New Hampshire. Keene State College is home to the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, one of the nation's oldest Holocaust resource centers, and the only 4-year BA degree of its kind in the United States, with both a major and a minor in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Within the Cohen Center, Dr. Waller teaches courses primarily focused on genocide and comparative genocide. In addition to 4 books, and one is in the works, Professor Waller has published 28 articles in peer-reviewed professional journals, contributed 20 chapters in edited volumes. His book on perpetrators of genocide, Becoming Evil, it's here, was released by Oxford in a revised and updated edition in 2007. In 2016, he published his latest book, Confronting Evil, on the other side, also by Oxford University Press. Dr. Waller has also worked extensively on intergroup relations and prejudice, and his experiences are chronicled in his first two books, Face to Face, The Changing State of Racism Across America in 1998, and Prejudice Across America, 2001. In the policy-making arena, Dr. Waller is regularly involved in his role as the Director of Academic Programs for the Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, an international NGO devoted to genocide and mass atrocity prevention. In addition, his work with the Auschwitz Institute also has included education and training in genocide prevention for the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He has delivered invited briefings on genocide prevention and perpetrator behavior for the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the CIA Directorate of Intelligence, the International Human Rights Unit of the FBI, and the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. In September 2015, he was named a Peace Ambassador by the Center for Peace Building in Sremski Most, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Most recently, in April 2017, Dr. Wallace was selected as the recipient of the inaugural International Association of Genocide Scholars Engaged Scholarship Prize. This prize recognizes exemplary scholarship along with engagement in genocide awareness and prevention. His fieldwork has included research in Germany, Israel, Northern Ireland, the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, Argentina, Chile, and Guatemala. We are delighted to welcome him this afternoon as we launch our new minor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Waller for his talk, Why Holocaust and Genocide Studies Matter Today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you very much to Western Washington University for the invitation and the president for the warm welcome as well. Thank you especially, and it's particularly an honor to be here with the Bond family. I had a chance to meet Noemi on 2 or 3 different occasions, and I cannot imagine she would be anything but thrilled in seeing what Western Washington has pulled together with this Holocaust and Genocide Studies minor. So her spirit, her message, her work live on in the incredible work that people are going to be doing here for generations. So it's an honor to be here to remember her as well. Thank you to Sandra for the invitation, and to Sheila for the, everybody can turn and wave at Sheila for the incredible work she has done logistically in pulling this together. And thank you for being here. You could be any other place. You could be outside getting rained on, which seems to be a consistent theme here, but you chose to be here tonight. I come to you tonight wearing 2 different hats, and you heard a little bit about them in the intro. I am the Cohen Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College in southwestern New Hampshire. Keene State is in many ways a similar institution to Western Washington. We were founded as a normal school, a teaching college in 1909. As you've heard, we were the first and still only college in the U.S. to offer an undergraduate major in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. To date, we have about 65 majors in a school of a little bit over 4,000 students, so it's become a very popular major. So the journey you're starting on here with this minor is an incredible one. Students will come to this recognizing the important impact it has in many areas of their work and many areas of their life as well. The other position I've held, I've been at Keene State since 2010, the other position I've held since 2008 has been the Director of Academic Programs with the Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. As you've heard, we're an international NGO at the Auschwitz Institute with offices in New York, Oswiecim, Poland, Kampala, Uganda, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. The work of this institute is to work with frontline personnel, government policymakers, military, police, security sector on issues of genocide prevention. It was founded in 2008 by a philanthropist who said academics do a great job talking with other academics about what genocide prevention is about and why it's so important. But most academics aren't on the front lines of trying to actually make genocide prevention a reality. So since 2008, at the Auschwitz Institute, we have trained now over 5,000 government, military, police, security sector personnel from 86 countries around the world. Most of that training takes place at the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in Oswiecim, Poland. So what I want to speak with you about tonight is an intersection of those two hats I wear from the standpoint of why is it that Holocaust and genocide studies matter today? Why is it that they matter from the standpoint of prevention? Why is it such an important step that this institution is taking to dedicate an academic minor to this study? It is much more than an academic step. It is much more than an academic minor. It is going to meet one of the world's most pressing, urgent needs. Someone at a UN briefing once said, the most pressing human rights problem in the world today is the problem of genocide. War crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing. So the three questions we want to look at are these, and this will just take us 3 hours, so we'll be fine. Don't know why you're laughing, but that's all right. 3 questions are these. 1, is preventing genocide possible? Why does it matter in the world? Secondly, closer to home, why does it matter to us? And thirdly, how can studying Holocaust and genocide studies help heal the divided societies that many of us find ourselves living in? So the first question, is it possible? Why does it matter? We absolutely believe that preventing genocide is possible, that it's an achievable goal. This is a quote from Genocide Prevention Task Force in 2008. Preventing genocide is an achievable goal. It's not the inevitable result of ancient hatreds or irrational leaders. There are ways to recognize its signs and symptoms and viable options to prevent it at every turn if we're prepared and committed. Preventing genocide is a goal that can be achieved with the right blueprint. Now, sometimes this is surprising to people because in truth, we don't do a very good job at preventing this. When societies come up to the verge of trying to destroy physically, culturally, socially, an identity group, very few things seem to stand in their way when they want to do that. But the truth is, this isn't the world we've inherited is not the one we have to settle for. That we can prevent genocide precisely because it does have its signs. It does have its symptoms. Someone has once said that history may not repeat itself, but it has a rhyme to it. It has a rhythmic quality. The unfolding of genocide has that same rhythmic quality. It has its signs and symptoms. When we know what those signs and symptoms are, and this is the work we do with the policymakers around the world, is to help them understand the signs and symptoms, then we can start to understand the points of leverage we have to make a difference before people start being exterminated on a wide scale. To get a sense of that, many of you recognize this image taken from Buchenwald concentration camp at Liberation. When we think of genocide prevention, if we start here, we've started far too late. I mean, there are still things we can prevent here. We can prevent other killings like this from happening. We can prevent this situation from getting worse. But if you think of genocide prevention as this piece, we've started too late. What we do in the field of genocide prevention is we think of this as a process with signs and symptoms The killing piece you see here at the end is genocide. But look at all the signs and symptoms that precede it. Classification, dehumanization, social exclusion, legal attacks on civil and human rights, economic expropriation of a target group, state-sponsored violence, mass expulsion, forced immigration, concentrations, and then the killing. Genocide prevention is absolutely about preventing this final piece, this physical destruction. But effective genocide prevention says there are signs and symptoms long before that we have to pay attention to if we want to be serious about what it means to prevent genocide. Policymakers we work with, very often when we introduce the material in a 2-day, 4-day, week-long session, we'll start talking about genocide prevention, and they immediately think what we're talking about is putting boots on the ground, putting military troops on the ground in a zone of conflict and stopping the killing by using physical force. That may be one tool of genocide prevention, but none of us want to wait that late. We do not want people in harm's way simply because we've neglected all the signs and symptoms that could have led us to that point. So when we talk about genocide prevention and why it's possible, we think about it in 3 ways. This is a picture, I know it may be difficult for you, some of you to see, the Kagera River in Rwanda. In Rwanda, April 1994, 6th and 7th, a genocide starts that in 100 days would kill 800,000 people in a country the size of Vermont. You take any 100-day segment of any genocide in modern history, we don't see that rate of killing. 800,000 people, mostly Tutsi, some moderate Hutu in 100 days. Not high-tech killing done pretty much by machete, by masu, wooden clubs with nails driven through them so they protrude from the other side. That's how most of the killing was done. 800,000 people in 100 days. Kagera River was so flooded with bodies. Most of the work I do in terms of my scholarship is on perpetrator behavior. So I've interviewed close to now 225 alleged and convicted perpetrators of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, from Latin America to the Great Lakes region, former Yugoslavia, Northern Ireland, and in Rwanda, killers will be very clear. They'll say, as we started the killing, we had no idea what to do with the bodies. Very seldom do perpetrators think about that ahead of time. So in Rwanda, if they were close to the Kagera River, they took the bodies and they threw them in the river. The river eventually dumps into Lake Victoria in Uganda. Survivors of that genocide will say at the height of the killing in 1994, you could walk across the Kagera River on the bodies of people who were floating down the river. 2012, my wife and I were in Kampala, Uganda for a training. We went out into Lake Victoria and we met people in the fishing villages who said, we still can't drink the water because so many bodies came down into our lake. We don't know if it's safe to fish, if it's safe to drink the water. We have to be careful about these things. So here's a real life example of a river. Bodies thrown into it, taken downstream, out into a lake. When we think about prevention, we can think about this upstream, midstream, downstream analogy. Upstream means, what's the before picture? What are the social structural factors that are in place where we can think about prevention? Where we want to put our efforts for prevention is always upstream. It's the cheapest, it's the most effective, it's the one that saves the most lives. So before conflict happens, that's where we want to be thinking about how do we protect human rights, how do we promote human rights, how do we avoid social exclusion, how do we build strong, functioning democratic structures. But even if that prevention fails, we haven't stopped preventing. Even if the killing starts, we're looking for ways to slow down the killing, to halt the killing, to mitigate the effects of the killing. We have a whole toolbox of political, economic, legal, and if necessary, military tools to stop the killing. So we're still trying to prevent. But when the killing is over, downstream means, now that it's done, how do we rebuild the society that has torn itself apart through genocide? And this may be the hardest thing I do in my field work, is working in post-conflict societies that are still incredibly at risk because we haven't understood how to rebuild them. I work often in Northern Ireland. Brexit's going to tear the country apart. It's already started to tear the country apart because so much of it was still fragile after the Troubles. Bosnia-Herzegovina, I have a good friend. It's very moving for me to see Naomi in the clip say, I wasn't going to be trapped by hate. Hate is what trapped me. It didn't trap the other person. I have a good friend in Bosnia-Herzegovina who survived that genocide who says the exact same thing. He was filled with hate when it was over, and he finally realized that what the hate was doing was trapping him. And he's working in peace building in Bosnia-Herzegovina because he knows if we don't rebuild this society, we're at risk for this to happen again. So for those of us who work in genocide prevention, we're always working in prevention. Before the conflict starts, when the conflict's ongoing, and after the conflict is over, we're trying to think creatively about how do we build societies and structures where these things cannot happen again. This is important for us, and I think for all of us in the room, because we recognize that preventing atrocity reduces a lot of different cost. The most significant cost is it reduces the human cost. The cost of human life and security. Most of us know as a matter of cultural literacy, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust between 1939 and 1945. That figure, 6 million, I'm always hesitant with my students because the number can become an abstraction. We haven't seen 6 million of anything in our lifetime. We don't know what that looks like. So a lot of times with my students, I'll talk about the number being 6,000,001. What does the number 1 add to it? The number 1 add to it's the recognition that 6 million victims is one victim, it's a second, it's a third, it's a fourth. Every one of those victims loved someone, they were loved by someone else. Every one of them had hopes, dreams, and aspirations that would never be fulfilled simply because of their identity. Not who they were as an individual, but the group that they were part of. It's estimated in the 20th century, conservatively, that victims of genocide, the number conservatively is 60 million total. Some scholars estimate that number could be as high as 110, 115 million people who were killed simply because of their identity. So the human cost of genocide is the key cost we're working to try to prevent. Second cost we work on is instability cost. Genocide doesn't recognize state borders. So when genocide happens in a country, it doesn't stay confined to that country. It has regional implications. Sometimes it has global implications. In Rwanda, Rwandans are fond of saying that when neighboring Uganda eats a bad meal, Rwanda gets indigestion. And what's funny is when I'm in Uganda, Ugandans are fond of saying when Rwanda eats a bad meal, Uganda gets indigestion. What they're both saying is when something happens in that country, it doesn't stay there. It affects our country, it affects the region. So when we see conflicts in Burma, the Central African Republic, in South Sudan, in Burundi, in Syria, breaking out, the concern there is not just for those countries where the conflict is happening, but it's for the countries around them, and many times the global implications that we can only guess at as a conflict is going on. Thirdly, there are economic costs. As I said earlier, the cheapest prevention efforts we have are before, what we do and what we call upstream. If we have to rebuild societies that have been torn apart by genocide, that's an incredibly costly thing for the world to take on, whether it's the United Nations or regional countries and communities. Rebuilding societies torn apart by genocide incredibly costly. We have data suggesting that after civil war, so after a country has torn itself apart through civil war, it can take 30 years for that country to get back the economic strength that it lost because of that war. So when the conflict in Syria is over, it may be 30 years before Syria economically is back to where it was when the conflict started. We don't have similar data for genocide, but it's at least that long. For a country that's torn apart for genocide, that is not something countries recover from quickly. It certainly is not something countries recover from cheaply. And then finally, the last cost we're trying to reduce is what I'll call diplomatic cost. What I simply mean here is that countries are very concerned, rightly so, about protecting their state sovereignty. And when we work with countries at the Auschwitz Institute, that's one of the first things they say to us is, we're fine to think about genocide prevention, but we're a sovereign state. We don't want anyone interfering in our state. And they see the United Nations as a tool that could do that. And what we say to them is, the best protection for your state sovereignty is you have effective genocide prevention strategies in place. If you have those things in place, there's no reason for the world to interfere in your country. You're absolutely a sovereign country. No one should have to interfere because you have the structures in place in democratic systems, in education, in social systems that give your country a stability that chances are pretty remote your country would ever fall into these crises of genocide. Unfortunately, even though we know the signs and symptoms, even though we know the cost of genocide, never again, as you see here on the memorial, hasn't been the reality. Never again actually comes from Buchenwald at the end of World War II. A Russian prisoner of war at liberation held up a card that translated into English read "Never Again." It's become a mantra of sorts in the genocide prevention community. The sad part of it is, it really hasn't had that much meaning for us. One journalist has said, "Never again" only has meaning if by it we mean, never again would Germans kill Jews in Europe in the 1940s. If that's what you mean when you say never again, it's spot on. But if what you mean is never again will we see something like the Holocaust, nothing could be further from the truth. It's again and again. It's ever again. We haven't learned those lessons that so many people have been trying to teach us and are so urgent for us to learn. Those are lessons we haven't learned. We see this, and again, I apologize, this is too small for most of you to see, but we see it today when we look at risk assessments that help us understand what countries in the world today are at risk of genocide. Now, one of the things I want you to leave here tonight thinking about is every country in the world is at risk of genocide. There's no country not at risk. Every country's at risk, they just differ in the level of risk. University of Sydney has a forecasting model that forecasts out 5 years, and this is our most recent model from 2016 to 2020. And for 5 years, they say, here are the countries we're most concerned about. And you see them here: South Sudan, Sudan, Iraq, Nigeria, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, and so on. These are countries either on the verge of genocide or some of them caught in the midst of genocidal violence. One country, Burma, that is in the middle of genocidal violence against the Rohingya population. Burma wasn't even on this list. Burma didn't make the list. It wasn't something we saw forecasted. These are countries we look at around the world and we say, if we think of risk as a stack of wood, these are countries where we have huge stacks of wood. And in some of these countries, we've got gasoline poured on that wood. And in some of these countries, we've got people with a match waiting to light this stack of wood on fire. When someone says to you about a case of genocide in modern history, we never saw it coming, just wasn't on our radar, it's completely disingenuous. We know the signs and symptoms. We see these things coming. We may choose to look the other way, but we know what puts a country at risk, and we know the types of things that can trigger that risk. Why does this minor matter so much? Why does the work of Naomi matter so much in her life? It matters because we have not done well at making never again a reality. And we keep setting back, and it's as if we hope never again to see it. But the hope here is going in a different direction. We're seeing it again and again and again, and there are reasons with population growth, scarcity of resources, climate change, the retreat of democracy around the world. These are all reasons for us to have increasing concern, not decreasing, but increasing concern about the future. Second question, closer to home, why does this matter for us? One of the things I worry about in our Holocaust and Genocide Studies major at Keene State is I don't want students seeing that as a global studies major, a major about everything that's happening everywhere else in the world except where they sit. Every country in the world is at risk. Why does this matter for us closer to home? This is an email I received in July 2018. I forget where I had spoken, but I'd spoken somewhere. Sometimes people email afterwards with different things, and this was an email from someone who said, I've read your books, I've taught your books. Those are all nice, those are two great opening sentences. Person had my attention, because sometimes you write a book and you think, no one's reading it, but no, she's read them, she's taught them. They're helping me win a lot of internet arguments with strangers. Now, it starts to go downhill on the third sentence. That's not why I've written the books, but that's what she used them for. But she goes on to say, I'm afraid we're too late, too divided, too something. I remember being in a huge earthquake with a geologist who was more afraid than the rest of us, and now I'm the Cassandra shouting genocide. And she was saying she was looking at her country, and she's asking the hard questions of the U.S. We're too divided. We're too late. We're too something. And she's asking an important question. Why do we talk about genocide everywhere else in the world, but we pretend it can't happen here? And even more so, sometimes we pretend it never happened here. That's part of the myth and the narrative we've constructed. As you know, it has happened here. We live in a country born in the extermination of one people and the enslavement of another people. Martin Luther King in 1963 said, our nation was born in genocide. Would it embrace the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race? We're perhaps the only nation which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated that tragic experience into a noble crusade. King's only wrong on one piece here when he says we're the only country to have done this. We work often with indigenous groups in Latin America who suffer the same fate and still continue to fight for their rights for self-determination, for self-definition, for their land, for their resources. These are issues significant to people, indigenous people around the world today. It is the height of arrogance for a country like ours to say, this could never happen here, that this minor should only be about things that happen elsewhere, because this is never part of our history. And understand, and I feel like we're friends now, so I know you're not going to let this leave the room, but understand, I've worked with government policymakers from around the world. The hardest group are U.S. policymakers, because they let us in and they say, yeah, genocide prevention's a great thing. That's something that's got to be a foreign policy objective. And we say, yeah, it is a foreign policy objective, but it has domestic implications. And to hear our officials say, oh no, it has nothing to do with the U.S. That's never been part of our history. And you're sitting in Washington, D.C. on land that was taken from indigenous people who lived there, and you have policymakers saying, doesn't have anything to do with us. It's not part of our history. It has everything to do with us. It has everything to do with our history. In 1951, the now defunct Civil Rights Congress took the UN Genocide Convention, which had been passed 3 years before in 1948, And I would have loved to have been there at this time. They took the convention, and the civil rights group raised their hands and said, excuse me, we're going to take the Genocide Convention that the world just ratified. And in this book, We Charge Genocide, they take the convention point by point by point, and they compare it to what they call in the book the Negro experience in America. And point by point by point, they line it up. And the book's thesis is to say, if this is what genocide is, this is what African Americans have suffered and continue to suffer. And they tried to get the United Nations to declare what America had done to African American people, the crime of genocide. So again, when we ask the question, can it happen here? This is not a hypothetical. It has happened here. Of course it could happen here again. We live in what scholars call a deeply divided society. My next book I'm working on that hopefully is going to be finished soon is on Northern Ireland. I taught in Northern Ireland for a year in 2017. Classic example of a deeply divided society where social identity, what makes us different rather than what makes us similar, is central, and that social identity becomes polarizing. In truth, there are dozens of deeply divided societies around the world today. And you can easily argue that you and I live, work, and study in a deeply divided society where our differences have come to matter to us more than our similarities. Those signs and symptoms I talked about at the beginning of the evening, some of those have to do with societies with these type of deep divisions. If you ask me what countries in the world are we concerned about, we're concerned about countries that have these characteristics of deeply divided societies because we know the risk that poses for countries. This is an image from where? Does anyone know? Texas. Oh, no. That's good, though. That's a great guess. It could well, that's a sign of the times that we say it could be Texas. Anyone know? Yes. Palestine? No. But again, great guess. Palestine was going to be the guess. I actually gave this away a couple minutes ago without meaning to. Oh, well played. Well played, my man. Yes, it is Northern Ireland. This is Belfast. Northern Ireland has 98 miles of wall, peace walls, that separate Protestants and Catholics. I took this picture in Belfast, the capital city, and as I was taking it, a group of 3 Protestant boys, 12, 15 years of age, came up to me because they saw me taking a picture, and I said I was taking a picture of the wall, and they told me the story of the wall, which had been in place for close to 20 years. And the story of the wall, they told me generationally, was the wall used to be this high, just this bottom part with graffiti, separating Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods. But their neighborhood had learned that with a wall that high, you could still throw over bags of feces, bags of urine, rotten food. You could still throw things over the wall. So what the city did in response is they said, okay, the wall's too small. We're going to add this gray concrete portion on here. And the boys said, that was a little bit of a challenge, but with a running start, you can still get things over that wall. And we did. City came back. They added this green metal piece here. And the boys said, well, now this was a puzzle because it was getting higher, but they should have been mechanics, honestly, engineers. They said, we worked out systems of levers. And so we had these levers that we developed that now we could still get stuff over with the levers. And the city thought they finally topped them. They added this 15 feet of fencing on the top. The wall can't get any higher. Structurally, it would be unsound. It's already pretty structurally unsound. It can't get any higher. The boys love this challenge because now they bring out pneumatic air tubes. And they hook these up in some really ingenious ways, and they showed me, to be able to still throw stuff over the wall. In Northern Ireland, the signs of deep divisions, deeply divided societies, are visible All over the country, you see these walls. People don't want the walls down. Every single person I talked to in the community said, we don't want the walls down. These walls keep us safe. When I do training with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, they say, we don't want those walls down. If those walls go down, we become the walls, and we don't want to be the walls between these two communities. So here are visible signs of a deeply divided society. In some societies, the signs are less visible than walls built like this, but they're still present. And those signs that I write about in Confronting Evil, you know, as I sit there and I listen to my introduction, it's like I write books like Becoming Evil, Confronting Evil. I've got one more evil book left in me. And then I'm doing children's books. Puppy dogs, ponies, flowers, coloring books. I swear that's what I'm doing after the next one. But here in Confronting Evil, I've said, if we want to look for signs and symptoms, if we want to look for risk, again, we have the data that tells us what puts countries at risk. Issues related to governance, issues related to conflict history. Here's maybe the most disturbing thing. The number one risk factor for a country in terms of whether or not it might have a genocide in its future is, has it had a genocide in its recent past 40 or 50 years? This is why downstream, post-conflict prevention is so important, because if we just turn our attention away because a killing's over, all the things that led to the killing are still there. They're still in place. In some ways, they're even more deeply entrenched than they were when the killing started. So conflict history we know to look at. Economic conditions we know to look at. It is not that poor countries are at risk for genocide. None of the data tells us that. What the data tells us is countries where wealth is unevenly distributed are the ones at risk. It's not poverty. It's unequal, unfair distribution of wealth that puts countries at risk. And then finally, the type of social fragmentation that we think about with deeply divided societies is also a risk factor. Now, I could bore you to tears and go over each of these risk factors in detail, but I want to focus our attention on one because I think it's one that has a lot of cross-cutting implications. And that one is, sorry, I have no idea what just happened. That one is democracy. It was last summer, not this summer, but summer 2018, in a 6-week period, and it still exhausts me thinking of this. In a 6-week period, I did trainings in Poland, Hungary, Thailand, Burma, Brazil. All 5 countries in the midst of what we call democratic backsliding, democratic recession, democratic deconsolidation. Democracy was dying a quick death in those 5 countries. And I returned after that 5-country swing to the US, where people raised similar questions about the death of democracy. When democracy and democratic institutions start to unravel, their impact is not limited to simply political governmental impact. That impact starts to put minority groups in those countries very much at risk. So we are concerned in the field of genocide prevention about the global democratic retreat that we see in country after country after country. This is what, again, sometimes we call democratic backsliding. Evan Osnos wrote in December 2016, what's that precise moment in the life of a country when tyranny takes hold? It rarely happens in an instant. It arrives like twilight, and at first, the eyes adjust. So we're out front today, sitting on your beautiful campus, reading a book. The sun starts to go down. Our eyes adjust. We can keep reading, we can keep reading. Our eyes adjust naturally. And at some point, it's too dark to read. At that point, we say, wow, I didn't see that coming. It just got dark all of a sudden. Osnos is saying, this is the danger of democratic backsliding. Something small is taken, something small is changed, something small is lost, And we adjust, because it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal until the point that it's a big deal, until the point that democracy is in full retreat, that democracy is under threat. The process of it, I mean, unfortunately, this is happening enough over the past decade that we've seen the process by which democracy retreats. We've seen the attempt of politicians and educators and religious leaders to create a nationalistic, mythic past. One of the courses in the Holocaust Genocide Studies minor is a course on nationalism. It's very important because this is one of the things that starts to erode the foundation of democracy. The attempt to divide populations into us and them. Again, I'm a psychologist by training. We don't have to teach people to do that. We do that naturally. People can inflame that very easily. Removing capacity for reasoned debate. Those 5 countries I mentioned, Poland, Hungary, Burma, Thailand, Brazil, policymakers in those countries were telling us there's no room left for reasoned debate. It's just people yelling at each other, people inventing things called fake news, and that's what politics has become. And the people who want to have a reasoned debate about real issues are pushed to the side, maximizing partisan advantage and polarization, and then finally, elevating the people's will over constitutional checks and balances. We're concerned about several countries in the Great Lakes region of Africa where presidents who've been elected democratically, like in Rwanda, for 7-year terms, 2 7-year terms. And then President Kagame says, but what the people want is the people want me to be president for life. I'll change the Constitution so I can be president for life. That's not democracy. It's not how democratic institutions work or should work in that way. Here's a democracy index from 2018, the most recent one we have. And what I want you to see is as the colors get darker, the reds and the oranges, these are countries where we're concerned about the death of democracy. But I also want you to notice the U.S. I'm trying to point it out like you don't know what the U.S. looks like, but you can see the U.S. The U.S. in this recent survey from The Economist listed as a flawed democracy. In all the years The Economist has done this survey and this research, the U.S. has never been a flawed democracy. Now, I think sometimes people quickly jump to 2016 and say, we've become a flawed democracy since 2016. The cracks have been there for a long time. For our history, there have been far too many people left out of democratic institutions. They've become more visible since 2016, but 2016 isn't what caused the cracks. They were there, but now they've become more visible to us. So the things we talk about when we talk about democratic retreat are not foreign policy discussions. I mean, they are, but they're also domestic policy discussions. We're concerned about these types of divided societies, democratic recession, because they all contain in them the potential for violent conflict. Adrian Guelke is a colleague I taught with at Queen's University in Belfast during my sabbatical there. And Adrian writes, in a deeply divided society, conflict exists along a well-entrenched fault line that's recurrent and endemic, and that contains the potential for violence between the segments. We see this in deeply divided society after deeply divided society, that sometimes those fault lines run so deep that when triggers happen, elections, constitutional changes, natural disasters, epidemic strike, that violence can often be the outbreak of those deeply divided societies. Can these things happen here? Obviously, I think they can. 2017, I was asked to write a piece by the Center for International Law assessing risk in the U.S. I do this often for countries around the world. Alone among nations in the world are immune to genocide. Were we noticing these same signs of poor governance and social fragmentation in a Latin American, African, or Eastern European country, the risk of warning would be clear and alarms would be raised. We cannot let the false comfort of believing it cannot happen here stop us from raising those same alarms for our country. And honestly, again, I get to work with policymakers around the world. if you describe some of the things that have happened in our country over the decades to people in other countries and ask them to guess the country, if they were guessing Latin American, African, Eastern European countries, I mean, that's where they tend to guess. And it would sound like, yeah, that's a pretty messed up place. You have to be careful about that. But these are things unfolding here in our country. So finally, how can Holocaust genocide studies and this minor help heal a deeply divided society? I'm going to go here to a quote from Zalman Grodkowski. He was a member of the Sonderkommando revolt in Birkenau. He was killed in October 1944. As some of you know, the Sonderkommando were those prisoners who came to Birkenau, most often Jewish. They looked healthy enough, they looked strong enough that the Nazis, who were always very hesitant to be involved face-to-face in the destruction, because they wanted to involve other people in the destructive efforts to keep them at a distance, the Nazis would pull these people out of line and say, you're healthy enough, you're going to be assigned to the Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommando would be given the work of taking prisoners off trains, shaving the hair, sending them through showers, taking the clothes off, cleaning the clothes, sending them back to Germany for use by the general population, cramming prisoners into the gas chambers, manning the gas chambers, going into the chambers when the killing was done, separating the bodies, cleaning the chambers of the feces and urine that had been evacuated during the killing, searching the vaginas and rectums for valuables, pulling gold teeth out of the mouth. Berlin collected tons of gold in this way, and then eventually burning the bodies. Many of the Sonderkommando, like Grodkowski, had to pull their own family members out of the gas chambers. Grodkowski survives by being part of the Sonderkommando until he participates in the revolt. Then he's caught and he's killed. Years later, we find his diary buried near Birkenau. And one quote from his diary now forms the entrance quote for the Israel exhibit at Auschwitz I. And the quote is this: "Come here, you free citizens of the world, whose life is safeguarded by human morality and whose existence is guaranteed through law. I want to tell you how modern criminals and despicable murderers have trampled the morality of life and nullified the postulates of existence." As you think about the Holocaust and Genocide Studies minor here, one of the things it's asking you to do is what Grodkowski is asking. Grodkowski is saying, come here. Let me show you when the two things that we take for granted, that there's a basic human morality, that we protect each other, we do not kill each other, we do not dehumanize each other, and there's a rule of law, and the rule of law protects everyone. And Grodkowski is saying, come here. Let me show you what happens when that morality is turned upside down and it applies only to these people and not these people. Let me show you what happens when the rule of law protects these people and not these people. This is what you get. You get Birkenau. And I think at its best, when we study in the field of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, we're pushing ourselves to ask that very question. What happens in the world when we get too lazy to protect each of us with morality, when we get too self-centered to apply the rule of law to everyone? Do not think, and you cannot think, that those things have no consequences. They always have consequences. And the final thing I want to say is particular to students who are here tonight. I get asked often, what can I do to make a difference in terms of genocide prevention? And I think of Arthur Ashe, a great African-American tennis player, civil rights activist, AIDS activist, and Ashe was asked this question often. And his most common response was, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. In other words, you do not have to wait until you graduate from Western Washington to make a difference. You do not have to wait to get a master's degree, a PhD, a real job until you pay off all your student loans. You start where you're at right now. You use the leverage you have. And you have, I don't care if this is your first quarter at Western, you have points of leverage no one else in the room has. And you do what you can. And these things start very close to home for us. Howard Zinn has said, we don't have to engage in grand heroic actions to participate in the process of change. Small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. I think Holocaust and genocide studies, at its best, invites people into the process of change. And when we invite you into that, there are no qualifications for it. You don't need the degree. You don't need a certain socioeconomic status. You're invited into the process of change because you're human. And when you come into that process of change, there is nothing too small that you can do. My friends in Rwanda are fond of saying, and I've heard this a million times, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Genocide prevention is a huge problem. It's a huge elephant. It doesn't get better from people stepping back and saying, too big of a problem, nothing we can do. It gets better because each of us choose to take a bite out of the problem wherever we're at, whatever we can do. Nothing there is going to be too small. If you're a student, you go back home tonight, you go to your dorm, there's absolutely something you can do tonight to promote and protect the civil and human rights and dignity of someone close to you. And whatever you would do is never, never, never going to be too small. If you're interested more in some of the risk issues, that's what Confronting Evil is about. Perpetrator research, that's Becoming Evil. Again, after this, it's ponies and dogs and butterflies, so you should get those while you can. I want to take a few minutes for questions and comments you might have, and before we get there, I want to thank you. I don't want to lose that at the end. You could have been a lot of different places tonight. You chose to come here tonight to remember Noemi, to launch this minor, but you came here tonight to be part of the process of change. And again, there's nothing too small you can do to make this world and the world you live in a better place. Okay? Questions, comments that we want to take?
So kind of off that last answer that you had, there's been a resurgence in an American dialogue of an association with ICE detention centers with the term concentration camps, which has met with some debate, especially with the association that you just said, of modern echoes having a not a genuine enough claim to like what the Holocaust was as an event. But there's also been the development of a kind of banner of horizontal kind of activist action on Jewish Americans' part of Never Again Action that has been not an established organization of resistance or activism, but has very much been an ongoing in larger cities across the United States. How do you think that the comparisons or the particular rhetorical deployment of ICE detention centers as they currently exist and are operated to the term concentration camps as we have historically understood them even prior to the Nazis' usage of them is able to kind of develop or should we use that as a basis for activism in the United States today?
Wow. I think you took it too seriously when I said you had to have a great, what is that about? It's a great question. I'll say a couple things in response. One is, you pointed out in your question, the Holocaust does not only own the phrase concentration camps. The phrase existed long before that. We've seen them in many other places other than the Holocaust. So we do have to be careful, and this is the tension. And I'm going to tell you, it's a challenge when you have an academic program in Holocaust and genocide studies. The word we wrestle with every day at Keene State is "and." What does the "and" mean in this? What's the relationship of the Holocaust to all these other cases of genocide? And we cannot politicize or even weaponize the Holocaust in ways where we say that thing happened in the Holocaust, therefore it could have never happened anywhere else and will never happen anywhere else. Concentration camps predated the Holocaust. They're still here afterwards. So I think that's important to recognize. I think secondly, we do have to be, that said, I think we do have to be careful also about weaponizing those concepts and using them in ways that would be inappropriate. For me, and some people tonight will disagree, I think the description of those detention centers as concentration camps are apt descriptors. And I'll draw two things here to kind of illustrate that. I have a friend who's a former judge in Bosnia-Herzegovina who's now retired in Vermont. She did a presentation for, I think, the Vermont Historical Society a few weeks ago on Bosnia-Herzegovina. She showed all the slides of these concentration camps and all the things that we remember from the former Yugoslavia. And in the presentation, she intermingled 2 slides from detention centers in Texas. She didn't point them out to this group of historians. She just had them in there as the slide presentation went on. It was a group of about 45 historians. How many people caught it? Not a single one. I mean, it looked like what we saw in the former Yugoslavia. One of the groups I do train in prevention issues is ICE. So twice a year I go to Glencoe, Georgia to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and I train the incoming group of ICE agents on what genocide is, what war crimes are, what crimes against humanity are, their role in promoting, protecting human and civil rights. Those agents who have been in those centers tell me that the phrase concentration camps is an apt descriptor. And I see in their faces the tension they feel between the work they have been asked to do as part of their job and the recognition of the similarities between the setting where that work takes place and what they've seen in the former Yugoslavia, what they've seen in pictures of concentration camps from other genocides. So I take particularly that second one for me from the people who actually staff the centers. For them to say to me, that's an apt way to describe them, I take that as confirmation of what I've believed as I've read the reports and looked at it as well. Thank you. Is that the final question? Oh, thank God. That was good. So,
Well, everyone, let's thank
thank you.
Professor James Waller for his fantastic presentation. Thank you.